I was a runner. I wanted to be the best runner in the world. I got to be the second best runner in the world at 5,000 meters. So I had
incredible.
a whole long career as an athlete. I went into leadership with a coaching approach. Any athlete who's been an elite athlete understands coaching, which is you give some messages and then you step back and let people do the thing. When things start to go wrong, some people jump in. For me, that's the wrong answer. That's when you learn the most, when you're under pressure as an athlete or in an executive position. So that's the point at which you trust people and give them the chance to grow. Being a chief exec 10 years now, 3 years at British Triathlon, 5 years at British Swimming, and now 2 years at UK Athletics. So yeah, this is my third governing body. I think you need to keep in touch with people who are at that cutting edge of everything that's happening. So being inquisitive and talking to interesting people who are really on the edge of everything that's happening is really important as a leader and as an executive to be relevant.
Hi, I'm Chad Biagini. I am the president of Nolan Partners and the host of the Excellent Leadership Podcast, and I'm joined today with Jack Buckner, the CEO of UK Athletics. Jack, thank you so much for joining me today. So you grew up a runner, and then one day find yourself running. How special is that journey? I want to hear that journey. Walk me to it.
Right, so we started.
Yeah, let's go with it. Let's do it.
Well, it's kind of a long story. So yeah, I was an athlete. So so my first sort of time from 20 to 30, that's what I was, so I was a runner and I wanted to be the best runner in the world, and I got to be the second best runner in the world at 5,000 meters. So
That's
I had
incredible.
a whole long career as an athlete, which included some fantastic times in the States, and I absolutely loved it. And then towards the end of my athletics career, I got injured a lot and I just started struggling, and there was a lot of talk at the time about things like blood doping and things. So it was just a difficult time. So when I actually left running, like a lot of athletes, I left with a bit of a kind of chip on my shoulder. I felt I hadn't achieved what I wanted to do. I could have done better. So I wanted to kind of get away from it. I went to work at Adidas, and I started off in running, but
Was that a hard transition to go from athlete to business person?
Well, it was really interesting because you didn't have any transition time. And literally, I went to the job interview. I turned up in a jacket like this, and that was the last time I wore a jacket in 12 years, So what I'd done was, when I was an athlete, I'd done an MBA, and that was so helpful. I would have been lost without the MBA. I would have been completely lost. So I had the MBA, and at that time, well, like a lot of the sports industry, kind of flip-flops between, do we need business people or do we need sports people?
Yeah.
And
we still haven't solved that yet.
No, exactly. So at that time, Adidas was going, do you know what? We need people who get sport. So I went in with a young group of people, mostly in the 30s, who were there to kind of, we get sport. So it was fun. And I immediately found myself in an environment that was, in its own way, just as competitive as athletics, with a group of young people. And it was a brilliant time. So it was
You were working in the UK or Germany?
I did all three. So I did the UK, then I went to Germany, and I went to the States. So yeah.
You've seen all of it then. That's special.
Saw all of it. Yeah, it was a special journey. It was Robert Louis Dreyfus was the owner. There was a kind of anarchic edge to it. And it was probably the time before too much process had kicked in. It was really funny seeing that Air movie, which featuring Rob Strasser and Peter Moore, who I knew at Adidas. Yeah, I mean, it was fun. You look back at it and it feels quite dated now and probably a bit sexist and, different world then, but it was great.
So much of that time, I feel, was trying to establish credibility for the sporting good brands. Like, it was necessary to try to sign the best in their sport and to make those predictions. Today, that still matters, but a lot of it's, I need to find some of the coolest people in this sport, or the people who resonate with certain customer demographics who we're trying to assign. Would you say that's? Oh,
yeah, and that is also the transition for the sporting goods industry. And I went in there, which I still am, a passionate Olympian, So I'm passionate about track and field spikes. And I can remember my first presentation, I was like, track and field spikes. And the chief exec got to me and said, Jack, you just need to sell a lot of shoes in good colours, And at the time it was like, whoa, So that kind of debate between function and credibility and fashion and style has been at the heart of the industry. And I agree with you completely. It has swung at times very much towards a different kind of leadership that probably quite hard for someone like me, who comes from a sports background,
sporting purist.
So I am a bit of a purist. I think second, third, fourth, fifth matters and is credible, and that's as credible as someone having a great following in entertainment space. But the world's changing, isn't it?
Yeah, you'd be happy to know that I picked up running this past year. I've gone my whole life trying to avoid this sport as much as I could. I was in cross country in high school for 6 weeks, said I can't do it, and I have fallen in love with running at this stage of my life.
With running, there's a group of if you come to running late, you've got a lot more potential improvement than someone like me who's got a lot of miles on the clock. So I've got a lot of old runner friends, and I'm in my early 60s now, and most of us are knackered, and then you get these bright-eyed, bushy-tailed people who've fallen in love with running later on, and you're the ones that improve because you haven't got the miles in your legs, you haven't got the old aches and pains. So if you fall in love with it at this time of your life and you've got the time and energy, it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I've got the Garmin set to remind me when I need to go jogging.
Yeah.
And I allow it to dictate my life. And I don't always look forward to the run.
No.
But the moment I'm on it,
I'm
glad I did this. And you feel fantastic afterwards.
Yeah. And the other great thing about it, which is you can take it anywhere, wherever you go. So, what I'll often do is I'll travel light, I'll have a pair of shoes and some kit, and somewhere like this city, you can get up early in the morning. If you get up probably by 6:30, the running's unbelievable. Just get across the road, Regent's Park or down by the river. It's just a fabulous way to get to feel a city.
Your Olympic training, your world-class running must have taught you a lot of life lessons and leadership lessons. What are some that still resonate with you today?
Any athlete who's been an elite athlete understands coaching. So I went into leadership with a coaching approach, which is you give some messages and then you step back and let people do the thing. So I think you come from elite sport with that approach of your coach. So the coach is the person who's influenced you, and it doesn't matter who you are. As lots of famous business people, will talk about their coach and what the coach meant to them, and the coach allows you to build confidence, trust, and empowerment. So it's about giving people a few simple messages and then giving them the space to improve.
So I want to stay on that for a second, because I find as a leader, your team being confident matters a lot. How do you actually create confidence in your business team?
First of all, to me, trust's at the heart of it. So trust's a really important word for me. So I think you need to communicate with them. You don't need to over-communicate. You need to make sure they know what they're doing. My exec team meets once a week for an hour, get the key projects on, the key messages, and then you need to communicate what you do, and then you trust them. And then the thing for me is when things start to go wrong, some people jump in. For me, that's the wrong answer. And again, that comes from the coaching athlete metaphor. That's when you learn the most, when you're under pressure as an athlete or in an executive position. So that's the point at which you trust people and give them the chance to grow. And I use a recent example of this. We had the World Relays qualification for the Olympics. Sprinting is full of the most extreme personalities. They're just so volatile. And I was really worried. They're supposed
to be, though, right? They're supposed to be explosive.
They are explosive.
Off the line.
Yeah, that's right. They're bang, bang, bang. So and the guy leading the squad, I looked at him, I said to him, "You got some big personalities there." He said, "I've got it." I spent the entire time worrying about it, but didn't intervene. And he was brilliant. We got all five teams qualified for the Olympics. Only us and the US did that. And he really grew as a leader. And that came from a few messages, trust and confidence. So I think he's really come on a lot as a result of that.
So you were at Adidas. You said what? You said 12, 13 years?
About 11 years.
11 years. You eventually left. Tell me about that transition in the next role.
Well, this is the sort of the big moment. So in 40, I did a massive life transition, which was my big mistake. So I was marketing director for Adidas in the States, in Portland. I love my job, but I was really struggling with the whole work-life balance and just everything that went on with a young family. So I was under a lot of pressure reporting back to Germany. So cut a long story short, threw it all away and I bought an apple orchard in New Zealand.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell me more about this. Of all things, how did this, I want to hear the whole thing.
It was kind of like, we all go through that moment, don't we?
Yeah.
What am I doing in my life? I'm under a load of pressure.
You said you were about 40, so it's the perfect time for it.
I had family in New Zealand. So my sister was out there and she loved it. We went out there at Christmas and we just had a blast. Work was massive pressure. And we jokingly said, wow, what about, big change? And then this apple orchard came up for sale and then we went for it. And it was a total disaster.
Really? Tell me more.
It was a complete disaster. It was, I literally, the moment I landed, I felt physically sick. And I was physically sick there for 18 months.
Really?
Yeah. It was just like I hit a brick wall. It was too big a lifestyle change and it was too painful. But interestingly, afterwards, all my mates in the States at the time, because I was in America at the time, and they're going like, it's going to be great, Jack. You're living your dream. All my British mates said, we knew it was going to be a disaster. As soon as I got back
the difference
here,
in cultures, huh?
which just epitomized the culture. All Americans are like, live your dream. That's amazing. Go for it. And all my Brits mates were like, you have a drink with them in the pub. They're like, we knew it was going to be a total disaster. It was the most stupid thing you ever did. And I was like, why didn't you tell me at the time? And they said, well, you were in America. You were infused by the whole American can-do thing. So
I appreciate you sharing that because I find in a lot of careers, there are some like, oh my goodness moments. What did I do? What have I gotten myself into? But when you're in it, you feel like you're at the edge of a cliff.
You do.
And you're never going to get out of it. Yeah, you got out of it. Can you share a little bit more on that?
I think it was absolutely for me, the kind of, I went over that cliff and it was probably, I got really depressed and I kind of mental health and stuff. But I think first of all, probably now there's more openness in the workplace about when you're struggling. So back then there wasn't, if you were in a senior exec position, you were constantly trying to prove yourself and you just have to suck it up and you have to suck it up. So there wasn't an openness to share the pressure. And I think that's important. So for me, it was too big a change. And probably also there's a bit of me, and I think this comes from the athlete, which is a bit rebellious. So the idea of kind of something dramatic sort of on one level appealed to me. So I think first of all, you need a lot of people to support you in your career. I think if you get to senior exec positions, you will have a moment. And then you need to be able to check in very carefully. You need a lot of support. And you also need to understand what motivates you, understand what's important to you, and sort of be able to kind of ground yourself. And I think there's more support now, 20 years later. I hope there is for people to make those decisions.
As you look back at that original decision for you, like what advice would you give yourself from that moment? Because I find sometimes it's hard to decipher, maybe this turns into a second question, the difference between like wisdom telling you no versus just fear of a good idea, because they can feel and look the same way. Yeah.
So I think that's right. And there's a huge amount of judgment in that, So athletes, all sports people are natural risk takers because you have to take a risk.
Especially runners, you have to tell your brain to be quiet over and over again and fight through the pain.
So there's an inclination to take a risk and make a move. And that kind of appeals to the run a bit. But then there's a logic bit, which is this the right thing to do? Could I tackle this in a different way? That's wisdom, isn't it? Comes with time and experience. I think there's probably a bit of me too. And I probably needed to hit a brick wall at some point in my life just to kind of work through stuff. I just probably would have rather that Brit War wasn't quite so dramatic. I think sometimes it's good to face challenge, and I think it's good to fail, but you just have to be able to pick yourself up,
So 18 months in, how does this chapter close for you?
So this
and then
chapter
take me to the
closed
next
with
one.
selling the orchard and kind of coming back to the UK pretty broken. So we managed to sell the orchard. We came back to the UK, and everyone was kind of broken. I was broken. My now ex-wife was broken. Kids had a tough time. So we sort of came back to the UK. We moved back to the West Country, which was kind of, I guess, our kind of spiritual home. Found somewhere to live, and then kind of step by step started to pick up the pieces.
And your next job after that to continue the journey?
It took a while as well, because I think there's another thing in this. I think there's a global market for jobs, when you're in that global market. And then when you come back to a country like the UK, you find out the local job market is quite small. So it's quite hard to find my way back in. So I managed to do a bit of consultancy. And then eventually I managed to get a job back with Sport England, more on the kind of public sector side of sport.
And what did that role entail?
Well, I guess that was a sport development role. So it's a middle management, sports development role. So it felt like the right thing to do for my family, but I probably struggled a bit with the job in some respects.
So then you eventually found your way to British swimming and then to UK athletics.
Yes, that's right.
Give me some of the highlights of
So
that part of the journey.
I did British triathlon first. So I've been a chief exec 10 years now, 3 years at British triathlon, 5 years at British swimming, and now 2 years at UK athletics. So yeah, this is my third governing body. Yeah.
A lot of people don't get their second chance. You see that often. People, I think, take the wrong CEO job just to take one. And if they don't excel, they don't get on the train to continue more. What's some advice you would give to a first-time CEO?
Well, I mean, you've got to face up. It is a big and complex agenda. So there's probably about 3 or 4 things you need to get right. You need to get the governance right. You need to get the sport right. You need to get the marketing commercial side right. And depending upon what else, you need to get the grassroots development. So there's about 3 or 4 core areas.
And you have some board members who are passionate about one and not the other.
Absolutely.
Vice versa, and you've got to keep them all happy.
You have, yeah. So it's a bit of a, yeah, you do. So yeah, there are 3 or 4 consistently big agendas that expand, and you're exactly right. There are passionate board members for each of those. So it's kind of a balancing act, and it's a sort of a reality check as well. So yeah, it's about constantly coming back to those agendas, and it's about knowing the ones you can move the dial on and make a difference, because you can spend a lot of the time on an agenda in governing body world and not be able to move it. So you just need to know where you can win.
So you have to spend your time in all of these. Which one do you enjoy the most?
Well, the one I enjoy the least is governance.
Fair.
So I have a simple rule, is that governance isn't a win. You never win at governance, but you have to be good enough. So you have to be consistently in the middle of the pack with governance. So what I try and do is I try and keep governance to a maximum 25% of my time. And I will try and do governance as well as I can within 25% of my time. Because what's happening at the moment is the governance agenda is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the CEOs who struggle they're being swallowed up by the governance agenda. So step 1, keep the governance agenda in place. Keep your eye on community. Then the 2 big ones are marketing commercialization and the sport agenda. So you need to spend most of your time on those 2 agendas.
As you look at your job today, what's the biggest misconception outsiders have about what your job is?
Wow, that's a good question. I guess it can seem like governing bodies of sport are bureaucrats trying to be policemen almost, or the police, So the regulatory function is integral to this job. You are the regulator. You are, in that sense, the regulatory function. And that's the bit that often gets focused on. Actually, you're the enabler. So you are the enabler for lots of good things to happen. So that's probably the misconception. And also, you tend to get a lot of criticism over the regulatory function. So you try not to take it personally and remember you're an enabler.
Yeah, it's good advice not to take business too personally, because sometimes, especially when you're in a business of passion, it's easy to. And you're going to have a lot of employees who are maybe like you, living their dream job. So they're filtering through passion, maybe not always through full rationale, because of that connection point. Is that easier or is that harder to be a leader of an organization where so much passion's already built into the culture?
I think that's really draining for CEOs. I suspect any CEO you speak to, maybe it's not just in sport, but I think certainly sport is, there's a bit of, you will, and certainly I've had in all my 3 CEO jobs, at any one time, I've had a number of those situations, people who are really passionate about the sport and can't control it and target that at you. And that can become really, really draining, whether that's through abuse on Twitter or emails or complaints so all that bit, you're going to get that bit. And what you have to do is try and not let it knock you off your stride. So that's, and I've seen it, you can see it in chief exec's eyes, and I'm sure you have when it's got to people. And so I know there's always going to be that, there always will be, and just try and manage it in the best way you can that's not personal. But it's not easy, and I'm sure any chief exec will say that.
Jack, earlier you talked about your time at Adidas and you starting to reach a point of maybe it was becoming all-consuming, perhaps easy to reach burnout at that point. As a CEO, taking care of yourself matters a lot, because otherwise you can't fully give to other people in an organization. How do you find the time, prioritize the energy to be able to take care of your own mental and physical well-being, and what does that look like?
So, I mean, I try and keep fit. So I try and eat healthily. I try and keep pretty fit. So, do a bit of exercise or walk, or like things like, I'll come down to London, I'll always try and walk, and so I try and do things like that. Try and decouple, take time with your family, and have those things, whether it's reading a book or like pottering around my garden or something. So having those things that are you and being clear about who you are rather than the role. So I think you need that. Friends are really important, and having a good group of friends. And like this week, I've got tickets back in Nottingham for the cricket tomorrow night with a group of mates. So it's stuff like that. You do things like that, and I think it's very important in life, whether you're a leader or not, that you've got people who know you and understand you, who you are, and you touch in with them, and they've been on the journey with you. So I have a lot of people I'll do that with. So they've been on the journey, and I've been on their journey, and they're there for them, they're there for me. So creating that time and space for that is really, really important. Yeah,
the advice that we always hear packaged in different ways is you become like your 5 closest friends, or you become like the 5 people you spend most of your time with. And I think it's really important for leaders to make sure that all 5 of those aren't in their current organization, right? Or they need to have a second 5 outside of their organization.
You're absolutely right. It happened to me, it happened to me, probably linked to the Adidas New Zealand thing. I thought when I got to New Zealand and I was on my apple orchard, I was like, oh my God, what have I done? And I thought, well, I've got mates at Adidas. And, then you realize quite quickly they've moved on.
Yeah.
It's a big ship. You've left that big ship and the ship's moved on.
Yeah.
And
they love you, but they've got other people closer to love.
Yeah, exactly right. So you're right. If you're too reliant on a set people in a specific organization, your belief system becomes linked into that to an unhealthy extent. I think it's really healthy to have people and friends who are doing different things in life and not in your little narrow world.
Yeah, I mean, I see it in executives transitioning as well, that it's hard for them to get breakfast, lunches, and dinners when they're unemployed.
Yeah.
And it's always my recommendation, network before you need a job.
Yeah.
And it's not that the other side's not empathetic and not caring, but they're just busy.
They are.
And so it's helpful for them if they know there might be professionally something they can get out of it too.
Yeah.
And it's a reality of life. Again, I don't fault people for that. I think it's them trying to maximize their time because they need to say no to things too. But being ahead of it really matters in networking because the moment you're not there, to your point with Adidas, it's everybody goes through the same experience of being somewhat forgotten, it feels like.
Absolutely. I think that's right. I also think it's healthy from just a curiosity perspective, because I think another aspect to me is, as a leader, I think you need to be curious, inquisitive, and the world's moving really fast and you're not getting any younger, and there's a ton of young people out there who understand what's going on, and a lot of the time I haven't got a clue what's going on. It's moving so fast and so away from you that I think you need to keep in touch with people who are at that cutting edge of everything that's happening. So being inquisitive and talking to interesting people and, people who are really on the edge of everything that's happening is really important as a leader and as an executive to be relevant.
I was asking another executive recently, are you born with curiosity or is it a muscle that you can build and develop? So what's your answer to that?
I think it's absolutely. I think you can develop it. I think.
How?
Well, I think it's just sticking your head above the parapet. I think often personalities in that, isn't it? So I like meeting people, and I'm not saying you have to be an extrovert to be a leader. I think there's some very good introverted leaders, but I think you can develop it, and it's just an interest in the world around you. I think that's healthy.
Yeah, I like asking people the last time they developed a new hobby and what it looked like, because I'm with you. I do think it's something that can be developed. Some people might be naturally more inquisitive, but you go into a new hobby and you've got the ability to dive into whatever that might be. Cheese making, coffee roasting, chess, jogging, right? There's so many different things.
Well, I mean, one of my ambitions I set myself was to learn French before I got to Paris Olympics, and I've totally failed.
But you tried?
Well, I tried for about a month, so I tried for about a month and it was just too much. I got a little thing on my phone and a little app. And so I thought, I'm going to go to France. And I told the guy who's the chief exec of French athletics, I said, I'm going to see you in Paris and we're going to talk in French. And I've completely failed.
Are you going to surprise him with this so-called failure, or have you already told him?
I haven't told him.
Lunch will be in English.
I haven't told him. I'm going to see him in Rome next week, and I'm going to go and
you'll get your bonjour.
Yeah. I can do bonjour. That's it. But I'm just going to say, Jean, I'm very sorry.
That's great. It's not an easy language to pick up.
No, it's not. He's very good. I mean, but there's something, isn't it? We Americans, Brits, we're all a bit arrogant, in the sense that we assume people speak our language. So particularly given what's happened with my country, with Europe, I thought there's going to be something really good about me going there and speaking a bit of French.
So this is an exciting part. We get to say the word quadrennial, which you only get to use on occasion in the Olympic world. But all of the hard work for the past several years is culminating on a stage. Is this the most exciting time to be in your job? I mean, the most stressful time in your job?
Yes, all of that.
Yeah.
So I'd just give you another example. So 16th of August, 2016 was one of my very best days at work. So I got up in the morning, I walked along Copacabana Beach. I had a really nice breakfast with a load of nice people. The Brownlees got gold and silver in the men's triathlon, and everyone said, I'm great at my job. So you can have those moments. You can have, and a few of them have happened to me. I've been very lucky, those magic moments that sport can produce. But then you can have the opposite. You can have a phone call saying someone's failed a drugs test, or somebody's gone and done something, and suddenly you're in an absolute nightmare situation, which has happened to me on a few occasions, and you have to literally stop everything and you have to throw your entire energy into trying to make the best of a live, chaotic, difficult situation. So it can go either way.
Yeah. Well, good luck. I'll be rooting for you. You've got some great runners right now.
We're doing all right.
That'll be exciting to see. What's the culture of UK athletics?
I think we're getting there. I mean, I hope I brought a lot in terms of empowerment and trust and building confidence, some of the things we've talked about. So I think we're getting in a good direction. I mean, track and field athletes are hugely individualistic. They will do their own thing, so it's trying to create a culture where we allow them to do that. So I hope it's an empowering culture that gives them confidence to give it their best.
How do you interview people to make sure they fit your culture?
That's a good question. I mean, I think with interviewing, particularly for senior roles, you need to take your time to do it well. Often interviews rely too much on personality and chemistry within the environment. So I think proper interviewing, you've got to really check people out. You've got to go through the CVs. You've got to look at their career records. You've got to go back and speak to people about them. So you need to check the track record. So I think interviewing it's a combination of a science and an art, and you've got to spend time to get it right. And my view, the mistakes made in interviews are often almost linked to charismatic personalities and not really checking people out properly. A certain person excels in a face-to-face interview, and that's not necessarily what you want for the job. So it's a complicated process, and you've got to put a lot of time and energy into it.
Yeah, I often see the best interviewer gets offered a lot of jobs, but that doesn't actually mean that they're the most qualified candidate for any of those jobs. So it's a skill, and in my seat, I'll tell candidates this to say, go work on your interview skills.
Yes.
And I'll tell clients this to say, don't be deceived.
Yes.
Right? Both sides need to be aware of how the game is usually played, because you have some phenomenal executives who just aren't well-versed at telling their story.
Correct.
And they need to be prepared to tell that story and to give examples and use the STAR method or however they want to speak to it. But then to your side, hiring organizations, having structure and process and scorecards can be helpful. And we're not all repeating the same 5 questions when we sit down with someone. We're actually pulling out information, because getting it wrong can be really harmful to an organization.
I think the best results I've had have been when I've done assessment centers. They've been well managed over a day or two. And I've had some good candidates come through who weren't the star interview performer, but over a period of time delivered, different qualities. And to me, leadership's also the right team and the right dynamics. And I've learned a lot about people who are more understated, diversity, inclusion, balance, trying to bring people on. So there's lots of work to do around all those areas.
Yeah. You said earlier you like to improve and get better, and you're curious and you're learning. What are you reading? What are you listening to? What would you recommend?
Wow, gosh. I'm always reading. I always read a mix of fiction. So I've always got books on the go. What have I read this year? I've read a bunch of fiction. I read at least one classic a year. I've done a Virginia Woolf this year, which I loved. And then I always have a lot of non-fiction. So I do most of the big sports biographies. I'll have done them at any point in time. What am I reading at the moment? I've got Margaret Atwood. I always love Margaret Atwood. So I do Margaret Atwood at the moment. And then I like poetry too. So I've always got a book with me, and quite often a little book of poetry. And it's just wonderful.
You are living a lot of people's dream job. What advice would you have to people who, let's say they're 10, 12 years into their career, for how they can continue developing and preparing themselves to get an opportunity like yours when the time comes?
Hardworking. You have to know when to hard work. You need to develop a complete set of skills. So you need to, know where you're weak and make sure you cover that. So for me, for example, governance isn't something I relish, but I got on a board, I was on a hospital board, and I learned a lot about governance. So look at what the job is if you want it, see the range of skills required, work out where your gaps are, and then have a plan to fill those gaps. So that was the big one for me. I thought, I get sport, understand marketing, got a marketing background, and weak on governance. So I spent 8 years as an NHS, National Health Service non-exec in a hospital. By the time I come through that, I could tick the governance box. So you need to be able to cover a range of skills, and you need to develop that portfolio, because it's a chief executive portfolio job. Yeah. And you have to be across all those areas, and you have to work hard to develop that range of skills.
It's an area that sport sometimes has its limitations. You have people who become functionally very deep. They become the best on the planet at game presentation, or phenomenal at external communications, and big organizations have opportunities to move them laterally. Yeah. The sports, when we measure our organizations classically, are pretty small. Yeah. And I love that advice you shared, where you joined a board, then you were able to pick up other skills from that board. And I see the same thing from my seat, because usually these boards, they have a lot of areas where they could use help. Yeah. So your background, they might say, hey, we want you to spend a lot of your time on some of the commercial and marketing endeavors because of your upbringing. But it's not like the finance committee doesn't need help. And if you say, hey, I'm happy to join the finance committee, they probably take you. Yeah. and so you have those opportunities where your day job might not give you that. And you now get to make critical decisions and pick up skills you might not have had otherwise. That's a phenomenal example. So I'm going to transition us to 7 questions I ask everybody. We call it the 7 Question Blitz. What sports event have you never been to that you would love to attend?
When I was at Adidas, this is going to sound dreadful. They said, what about the World Cup? And I didn't go because I wanted to get back to see my family. So I missed my chance to go to the World Cup in football.
Wow, where was it then?
That was the one that in France, when France won. So I said, do you know what? Nice, but I'm going to go and see my family. So I turned down my ticket to the Football World Cup. And I would, afterwards I thought, why did he turn that down? And, I went at home and I spent time with the family and the kids, which was, for all sorts of reasons. But so I would quite like to get another opportunity to go to the Football World Cup.
I still have not done that yet either. And I'm sure it's just an incredible atmosphere. I've been here when the Euros are taking place in Europe. And the energy of that is unlike anything I get back in the States.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you said that. It's always difficult to say that because you get in trouble when you say that. So
I'm allowed to.
Yes, but I was in New York for a Subway series in the baseball, and everyone goes, "You'll never have seen an atmosphere like it." And I thought, well, I see that in a Premier League football derby, regularly, So and that's I was at Newcastle United the other week, and and I've been lucky enough to see some good, great sport. So over the years, so I would quite like to see a World Cup in football.
Yeah, rivalries in all sports are pretty special to get to be a part of. Of all your sporting memories, what stands out to you the most?
I've got too many, really. I mean, I've got obviously my personal ones, and
give personal and then give.
Well, personal was winning the European Championships, which in 1986, which I still have the championship record. So it's lasted 38 years.
It's lasted that long.
Well, it might go next week when I'm in Rome, but I'm hoping it doesn't go in Rome because then we're hosting it back here in the UK, and then that will be 40 years. So
that's a long time for a record to hold.
It is. It was a big race, and that year it was the race. So that was wonderful. So
does that say something about running that's different than other sports? Because other sports we've seen significant gains in performance. The serve speed in tennis, or how many rounds somebody can go in boxing at high levels of energy, to how people kick the ball, spin the ball, etc. Did we reach maximum efficiency in running 30 years ago?
Well, no, what's happened, interestingly, is in the last 3 or 4 years with the new shoes, the times have gone crazy. So that's why I'm amazed it's still
hard
there.
Work can be helpful.
Because, definitely, I've got, people will tell me it's a second a lap at 5,000 meters, so it will now the shoe technology has transformed running in the last 2 to 3 years, this new wave of shoes. And that's why, if you look at the times now and the recovery, they're incredible. So people are running, 15, 20 seconds, and I don't want to sound like a old guy, but, the shoes have made a massive difference. And I've got friends who are coaches and everyone will say that. So times are getting a lot quicker. But interestingly, it's only the last 3 or 4 years in that they've really accelerated in that improvement. So.
Well, the 2-hour marathon,
yeah,
that event, I heard somewhere that those shoes actually only last for about 30 miles before they're completely worn out. They're shoes that have incredible technology in them.
Yeah.
It doesn't deny the fact that it's one of the greatest runners ever, if not the, at that distance, but hardware helps.
Yeah, it does. No, absolutely. And nothing, in some ways, nothing's changed. You need all the principles you had back then of discipline, hard work and everything. But definitely, and it's a great thing, technology now has got so much innovation and recovery and all the things that have happened in sport in the last 30, 40 years, and whether it's ice baths or there's a whole industries developed around rehabilitation and performance improvement, which is incredible. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it's wonderful. We've gotten into ice baths recently. And then I listened to a podcast from Andrew Huberman that disappointed me because he said one of the greatest benefits of an ice bath is to shiver. So he doesn't really want you to become accustomed to the cold. He wants you to drop into the cold and get out and shiver violently. And I'm like,
yes.
I like the fact that I got used to the cold. The shivering is the uncomfortable part. Yeah. You are not a golfer, so I'm going to ask you a question differently than I normally ask. Yes. What 3 people would you want to go on a long walk or jog with, either currently living or historical?
So I'd like to meet Phil Knight, because of what he's done. And I read, and he's a runner too. So
You've never met Phil Knight?
I've not met Phil Knight. No. I've met people around him. Because when I read the book, and also he's a runner. So Phil Knight I'd love to meet. I guess I'd like to have met Obama, and probably Tony Blair too are people I'd like to have met.
Why Obama and Blair?
Well, I just think they were visionary leaders, and the level of complexity of the jobs they had, and they tried to lead change. They were a bit ahead of the time in some respects. And you look at what's happened since, which is a bit scary. So I'd like to have met them,
I think both of them, regardless of where people fall politically, both of them came across presidential, and both of them were phenomenal communicators.
Yes.
And that's not always the case in that seat.
No, so they'd be, but and loads of the sports people I'd love to have met, and I'm lucky enough to have met a lot, which has been great. So.
What's something about you most people wouldn't know?
I like. Well, I've told you about New Zealand, so the apple orchard story most people don't know.
I'm in.
Which is a good. That my favourite sport's cricket. I'd love to have been a cricketer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you ever play?
Well, what I did was, again, in my 40s, when I came back from New Zealand, I spent about 10 years playing cricket. I was lucky enough to play with both my sons as they were growing up. So when I look back on that period of my life, I have such great memories of playing cricket with my sons. And cricket's a great sport because you can intersect youth and experience in a way and competition. So the psychology of cricket meets that combination of young talent. And so we had some proper competitive experiences, playing together with the gaps between us, which I absolutely loved. It's
a great sport. I went to the Ashes last year at the Oval, and we had the greatest time.
Yeah. It is it's the sport I love, so I love all sport, but cricket was the one and if you said to me, right, how would you like to spend your summer, and you've got nothing, I would spend my whole summer playing cricket.
I love that. As a CEO, you must have some professional pet peeves. What are things that just irk you in the office space?
I'm impatient. I don't like it. I don't like long meetings. I don't like being invited to a big 3 or 4 hour meetings when people pontificate. So I like people to get to the point and move on. So I like a good pace, so I don't like long meetings.
Is there a way that you encourage that within culture? Do you have any process or methodology to
Well,
require?
people usually get it because I start fidgeting, or I start sort of fidgeting. I mean, my body language tends to give it away.
Yeah.
So
stuff they couldn't see on Zoom.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think people know, because I do kind of interject. I don't like let people go on to me. I'm getting much better at listening, which is another thing. So one of my objectives every year as a leader is to speak less and listen more.
How do you hold yourself accountable to that?
Well, I write it every year in my diary.
Do you? Good.
Yeah. I had this thing, I'm going to speak less and listen more in the second half of my life.
Yeah.
It's not working.
I sometimes will make a memo to myself, and then 2 minutes in the meeting, I'm like, but I've got something I really want to say. You have to hold yourself back. It's hard.
My best friend is a bishop, and he has that ability to sit there and listen and say nothing, and it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I think you get that in probably like and he just kind of sits there and doesn't say anything. It's just unbelievable.
And it's a superpower, because at the end of you spending time with him, you feel you have a best friend, and he didn't say anything.
No.
He listened. And it's such an important skill set that especially extroverts, we have to practice.
Another leader who, I mean, you will know, Maurice Watkins, who was my chair at British Swimming.
Yeah.
He had that quality as a chairman. He would sit there and say nothing, and then he'd say something, and everyone would be like, wow.
There becomes gravity in the words when you're selective. If you weren't working in sport, what would you be doing?
Well, the environment. I'm passionate about the environment.
Yeah.
Really passionate about the environment. And I've spent 8 years as a trustee of the National Forest, which is an environmental thing. So it'd be the environment for me. And absolutely be the environment. And, something in nature, climate change, the environment. That's what I'd be doing.
And then last one, softball for you. Next time you're in Nottinghamshire, you're in the Midlands, where would I call home for you?
Where would you what?
Where would I say is home for you?
Nottingham, West Bridgeford. Yeah.
Okay. Where do I need to eat next time?
Well,
I go to
if you
West
want a
Bridgeford?
posh meal, you go to Sat Baines.
Sat Baines.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to cost you a lot of money, but that's a good place for a posh meal in Nottingham. Yeah.
Deal. Thank you. Jack, so much fun spending time with you. I appreciate you letting me go through your journey and hearing some of your story and the great wisdom and advice that you shared with us.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you. And does he have a hotel up there? There's a hotel I've been to that at a minimum was Paul Smith inspired.
Yes, there's a Paul Smith. In fact, he does a lot of inspired stuff. So he's got an inspired screen at the cinema.
Okay. I love that.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I've been into this hotel. I had lunch or brunch there years, 7, 8 years ago. I hope it's still there.
It is. Yeah, it is. Yeah. That's up in, what's it called? Yeah. My wife would tell you, I'm only an apprentice in Nottingham, so I've only lived there about 4 or 5 years since we got married. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful area. So ever since I took this job, I've gone almost every time I come to London.
Good, yeah.
Say let's go see Paul. Let's go up there before we come down to the city for a week of work.
That's nice.
Almost every time, maybe 50%.
Yeah.
But it's a wonderful city.
Well, I'd like to say, I think there's still bits that need to move the dial a bit,
Yeah. Thank you, Alice.
We always my wife always says about the East Midlands, it's a bit, everyone in the north, everyone in London's London, and then everyone's in the north, kind of like Liverpool, Manchester, they're really up themselves. Whereas Nottingham's the East Midlands is a bit understated.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Yeah.
But the countryside is
It's good,
gorgeous. I've gone through Derbyshire.
Yeah, it is good.
Chatsworth is up there,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
I've done Chatsworth.
Do you know Tim Hinchy?
I do, yeah, very well.
Tim's a very good friend of mine.
So I just hired, of course, because you guys were in the same world for a while, we just hired their senior director of comms, I think is the title we ended up on. Maybe it's director of comms, and we're doing another role for them in events right now.
So Tim, I'm always saying to Tim, because he always talks about his time at Derby County.
Tim's great.
And how much he loved it. And he's how much his wife loved it. And and he's big friends with Nigel Clough. So now, of course, he's a big Mansfield Town supporter.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, Tim's a great guy.
He is a great guy.